until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, you're not actually going to change. And so for me, it was this prevailing notion that I was capable of so much more.
Welcome back to the Nichols and Dime Show, everybody. My name is Chris Nichols. I'm your host. My guest today is Jake Kauffman, who is a men's transformation coach, author of Let Love In, which is his book. I actually have it right here. And his mission is to help successful men go beyond their limits so they can reach their highest potential. And that really is a theme of our podcast because we talk a lot about his personal story, which is a very impactful one since he experienced abuse as a kid. And then he talks about how he addressed that pain and how he masked that pain or covered it up for a while to a point, even though he was successful in certain areas of life, he still was very unhappy. And so we talk about this healing journey and how he was able to overcome that, and then ultimately how this led him to start his coaching business to help other men do the same. We also talk about how he worked with his clients and lessons learned as an entrepreneur, as we typically do on the Nichols and Dime Show with my guests. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, but first a quick mention from the sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Jungle Athletico. You can use the code Nichols and Dimes, NICHOLSANDDIMEZ at checkout for 15% off. Jungle Athletico is a jiu-jitsu supply and apparel brand. We also have Truve, which is a plant-based energy tea and energy drink. If you want to try a new one, check it out. It's healthy. You can get 50% off your first order there. Please subscribe to the Nichols and Dime Show on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this episode. What's going on, Jake?
Chris, what's going on, man?
Man, thanks for coming down to San Diego and meeting up with me.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited to be here and pumped for our conversation.
Yeah, man, me too. You've got a wild story. And I mean, I just love the work that you've been up to. I was, of course, looking all about you online. I was reading your book last night. Yeah, I mean, just it's an easy read, dude.
I'm glad to hear it. Some people, I mean, obviously, given the topic of conversation, which we'll get into on this episode, some people, have a little bit more difficult time reading it because it talks a lot about the things that, at least for most people, we historically want to avoid.
Right. Yeah. And when I say easy read, I think what to clarify that, not that the topic is easy, but you want to keep reading.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I love that.
Yeah. So well written, did a great job with it. And
thank you.
You've got your coaching that you've been doing. And I mean, I just related so much to kind of the story of when you were feeling lost.
Sure.
To, starting your own business.
Yeah.
Right. And I've kind of had a similar, mental journey in terms of that path for myself. So
of course,
I was really excited to talk to you like this and actually pick your brain about it.
Yeah, well, they say entrepreneurship in many ways is a spiritual journey in and of itself.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of initiates you into personal growth.
Yeah.
It forces it upon you.
Right, dude. Yeah. It's so true. But I think it'd be good to start to just get some background on you.
Yeah.
Who are you? Where do you come from? Where did you grow up? What was life like? And then we'll get into the focus of what my show is, which is really the entrepreneurial journey and the business side of it. But I know you've got some big life events that really influenced your work today.
Yeah, definitely. So, and of course I talk about this in my book, but I was born and raised in a small town in Michigan, very insulated environment.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up, I experienced abuse and, very loving family, very loving parents, but as it were, experienced some abuse. And the catalyzing moment, if you will, was when I was roughly 12 or 13 years old. I attended Christian summer camp every summer, and one particular summer was abused by an older camper. And the unique part of the situation was the fact that it happened in front of all of the friends that I grew up with, and nobody tried to stop it. And so, of course, there were all of these various layers to the abuse and to the trauma, because there was what happened to me, but then there was what was going on around me when it happened to me.
Yeah.
And of course, there was what didn't happen, which was there were no empathetic witnesses, which, and when it comes to the topic of trauma, we now know that trauma is significantly less about what happens to us and much more about what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. And this is why you don't need to have experienced big T trauma, whether it be assault or abuse, because at the end of the day, it's all about the stories and the beliefs that we make up about ourselves, other people, about the world in general, and how we fit into and relate to the world. That dictates, of course, our belief system and our identity, and therefore how we show up and present ourselves and the actions we make, the decisions that we make, all of those various things. And for me, after the abuse, I started to mask, right? So I started to develop these adaptive traits, these compensating strategies in order to ensure that that event never happened again.
Right.
And this is very atypical response to trauma, right? We overcompensate in order to ensure that we don't get hurt again.
Laugh it off.
Right. Yeah. And that this can look different for everyone. For me, I turned into this super high performer. So I needed to excel at everything, which was really just an unconscious attempt to claim victory over my pain and over the insecurities that my pain produced. But of course, all of this was unconscious. And it wasn't until I was 26, 27, where I started to notice myself repeating various patterns. And I didn't have this language for it at the time, but what I would say to my clients now is that, the pattern always reveals the problem. And so I started to notice that I held people at arm's length, and I didn't actually allow them to see me for who I genuinely, truly am. And there were parts of myself that I, again, however consciously or unconsciously, hid. And that's what happens when you grow up in religion, or if you grow up in a society like ours that is very much bent on performance, achievement, the pursuit of success, all of these various things. A natural byproduct to that is people repress and suppress or hide the less than ideal qualities and characteristics about themselves. And they posture and bolster or position the ideal qualities and characteristics about themselves. Well, that creates a pressure cooker, right? Because you need to continually and actively hide these parts of yourself so that other people can't see them because you're afraid of judgment or rejection or abandonment. And when you live inside of a pressure cooker, you need to have a release valve. In other words, you need to have a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
It's very easy to look at drugs, alcohol, and pornography and say, okay, those are bad. But in terms of addiction, you can be addicted to looking good, to shopping, to the internet, to social media, to working out obsessively, being meticulous about your food and restrictive dieting. All of those various things can serve as coping mechanisms to support us in dealing with, and by dealing with, I mean ultimately avoiding, because any coping mechanism by definition is an avoidance strategy.
Right. Even though some are better than others.
Correct. Yes. Obviously, some have negative side effects.
Right.
Others have so-called positive benefits, which makes them much more easy to justify, right? Because it's, for example, I'm very health conscious, hidden behind the guise of the fact that it's good for me, right? It benefits my body, and it does, but that's not the question. The question is, what ultimately drives you to do that? What is the underlying unconscious motivation beneath the behavior, which of course is what our ego seeks to hide from us in order to maintain the status quo, in order to keep this self-protective programming going. And so for me, that looked like not being willing to let people in and see me, because if I allow them in, then I'm opening myself up to potentially allow them to hurt me.
Can you describe in more detail what you mean by letting someone in?
Well, just for example, being vulnerable.
Sure.
And being willing to talk about what I'm struggling with, because we all have interpersonal struggles, whether it be stress related to work or being a parent, for example, which comes up in a lot of the coaching that I do with men, is just how much pressure they have to provide, to protect, all of these various things that, of course, are normal, but that do create a certain sense of anxiety and pressure and stress for people. Again, especially when you live in a society that is very much bent on comparison and competition.
Right.
All you got to do is spend 5 minutes on social media, and you see this very quickly that everyone is trying to, right, position themselves as an influencer, right? And it's called ego idealization, right? We constantly are looking toward an ideal, and we naturally compare ourselves to that ideal, and that serves to essentially motivate us into taking action, right? But what this oftentimes looks like is overcompensating, because you have a lot of these people who are, showing you the highlights, for example, and they're hiding, right? Repressing or hiding the less than ideal qualities and characteristics about themselves, or what they're actually going through. And because of that, they don't address those things, right? They don't speak into those things, right? And we can't heal what we keep hidden.
Yeah.
And so when you live in a society that is largely bent on performance, it continues to create this pressure cooker. And that's where I found myself, because I was actively running from this painful incident, right? Performing my way around it or over top of it. And we see this so much in the men's world,
right,
when it comes to men's work. The majority of men's work is simply creating a more socially approved version of the false self. Allow me to explain. The person who...
Say that again. Say that again.
Socially approved version of the false self. Right? The person that I had become in response to my pain was not who I actually was. So much of my personality was made up of these adaptive traits, these compensating strategies, in order to avoid experiencing that pain again. They weren't genuine traits. So a huge part of my personality was due to this painful incident. And it wasn't until I acknowledged it for what it actually was, because after the fact, as a 12 or 13-year-old, I just ignored it. I, like you said, laughed it off, pretended like it didn't bother me, when in reality, it was devastating. I was completely humiliated, because again, it happened in front of all of the friends that I grew up with, middle school, high school. And so I had yet to deal with that humiliation, that embarrassment, and the shame that the incident produced, because, and I talk about this in the book, it started to follow me around town because everybody knew about it. And I went to a school, my graduating class, I think, was like 63 people. Oh, wow. So everybody's, business is everybody's business. Right. And so it followed me around. Going back to, men's work, if you think about it, the prevailing and predominant message is, okay, you're overweight, you're out of shape, you need to get your shit together. Right. Essentially. Right. That's kind of man up. Right. That is the prevailing
be an alpha,
message.
All that stuff.
100%. Yeah. Yep. Like stop eating like shit. Yep. Start going to the gym. Start prioritizing your health and fitness. Get your financial situation in order, get your house in order, if you will. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that necessarily. There are positive benefits that are produced as a result of going to the gym and prioritizing, your diet and your nutrition. Of course, you're going to start to feel better. But on the other hand, both of those men, right? Because again, it's if you're overweight, not out of shape, and you don't have your shit together, well, start eating healthy and get your shit together. It's the same song, different dance, same package, different bow. Both of these men are overcompensating, just in the opposite direction. So it's just creating a more socially approved version of the false self, of these various masks that we wear in order to be successful, in order to be loved, in order to be accepted, that aren't genuinely us.
Yeah, no, I love the way you described that. What did that look like for you, this phase that you went through when you were masking, when you were doing this socially approved version of the false self, right? How do you describe yourself during that time?
Well, the ego thrives off of a couple of things: comparison, competition, and the need to be contrarian. And so, of course, I had to be the best. I had to be right. That the ego seeks to be separate and superior. And so much of my actions were based on just that, the pursuit of power, possession, prestige. I was basically completely focused on myself and further bolstering myself, because in the first half of life, that's what it's all about. It's all about establishing myself and making something of myself. But as long as you play that game, right? Faith, family, fitness, finances, and I realize that there's a lot of inherent good that comes from those things, but a lot of men's pursuit of that is simply them performing over top of their pain, just like I was, right? This push, push, push mentality to constantly be better. I can tell you, after coaching men for the better part of a decade, is most often an unconscious attempt to claim victory over their pain.
Wow. So, like, what specifically were you trying to really perform well at that time? What was it? Was it like
everything?
Everything. Yeah. Just job, fitness, all that stuff.
Yeah. So in high school, it was, I was a 3-sport athlete. So
what'd you play?
I played basketball, baseball, and I ran cross country.
Nice.
Yep. So I was obsessed with becoming better at those things. And on some level, as a teenager, we need to do that, right? We have to develop this healthy ego structure in order to build healthy self-esteem, to know that on some level, like, I can do it and I have what it takes, right? So as an adolescent, that's actually an important phase of psychological development. I don't want to make this phase wrong, because it's a necessary step. However, most men get stuck there, which is why I say that the hyper-masculine game, or this high performer game that most men rely upon in order to become successful, was always meant to fall apart. It was, and it has to. Otherwise, you have 35, 40, 45-year-old men, or excuse me, you have 15-year-old men in a 35, 40, or 45-year-old man's body. They're still trying to prove themselves, right? They're posturing. And of course, they're justifying it behind the guise of faith, family, fitness, and finances. Providing for my family, leaving a lasting legacy. Not that there's anything inherently wrong with those things, like I mentioned, because there's not. You should still go to the, I'm not telling you to not go to the gym. I'm telling you to reconcile the underlying unconscious motivation that potentially has you overcompensating and addicted to going to the gym, as an example. Because again, the gym can serve as a coping mechanism in the same way that drugs and alcohol can.
Right.
And I've coached a lot of fitness professionals over the years, and I can tell you that definitively, every single one of them that I've ever coached, what drove them to the gym and becoming obsessed with their health and fitness and optimizing for their health and fitness was insecurity.
Kind of like how so many bodybuilders are driven by body dysmorphia.
100%. Yeah. Beneath all of that is just unresolved, untended to pain, which is why in the world of personal development and transformation, the most important question, the first question that you have to ask is, what have you been doing with your pain?
Right.
Because if we don't, we're building on top of a faulty foundation.
Well said.
We are. There's no other way. There's no other way around it. Perfect example, New Year's resolutions.
Yeah.
We're 3 weeks into January. Statistics show that come, I believe, February 1st, over 85% of people will be off track when it comes to accomplishing their goals. And by the end of the year, over 92% of people will have failed to accomplish their goals. Why is that?
Right.
Why is that? Well, it's because their beliefs and their identity are not a match for, not congruent with their behaviors. Right? So they don't take the actions, the necessary decisions, or make the necessary sacrifices or investment, whatever that looks like, to actually realize the goal. Right? Our behaviors, our actions, our decisions, those are just symptoms. Those are just symptoms. What is the root cause? What's the disease? It's our beliefs and our identity. Well, what shapes those things? It's our experiences, our upbringing, our parenting, our conditioning.
Right.
And so most of that happens when we're between the ages of 2 and 7. So by the time you're 30, 35, 40, you're largely unconscious to most of what has gone into shaping who you are.
That's important. That's important. Yeah, because it just takes that much more work the longer you wait.
Correct. Yep. Which is why, Carl Jung popularized the term necessary suffering. That in order to break free from this stage of individuation and self-actualization, we have to experience necessary suffering, which looks like an incident, a relationship, a death, a situation, a circumstance that we simply cannot deal with. We have to fail at something. And that's in many ways what happened to me. When I posted my story of abuse on social media, my nervous system completely collapsed.
Yeah.
And I suffered from what is clinically referred to as an acute nervous system breakdown, because the level of connection that was created by virtue of me posting my story on social media was so much for my nervous system. It overwhelmed me to the degree that, I simply, for those of you who are listening, to really wrap your minds around this, I just had a full-blown panic attack that came with some pretty serious side effects at the end. Because I could no longer hide. All of those masks that I had taken on unconsciously as a result of the abuse, and again, we all do this. We all do this. We just simply start doing it when we're really, really young in order to do what? In order to gain the love and acceptance of who? Mom and dad. So we all start to do this when we're really young. All of us do. Who do I need to be? Like, what do I need to do in order to be loved, accepted, and eventually, later on in life, successful? So we're not thinking about acting authentically, right? It's a performative, dance, if you will, where we're just taking on these various, and all you have to do is look at young kids, especially brothers and sisters, to see how this works, right? I'm a co-parent to 2 really beautiful, lovely kids. The 9-year-old boy is very inquisitive. He's very, very curious. And so he's constantly pushing the boundaries, right? And it's fun, and it's all very, very innocent. He's a very, very good kid. But because of that, he oftentimes gets in trouble. So his sister, who's 18 months younger than him, she watches this behavior, right? She sees that he gets in more trouble than most kids because he's constantly testing, pushing the boundaries, right? Which
sounds familiar.
Of course, yeah, right.
I have a younger sister as well.
Totally. And most of it is driven by just an innate curiosity about the world and wanting to have fun. But again, it oftentimes gets him in a little bit of trouble. So how does she compensate as a result of seeing his behavior play out and him getting in trouble? Now she adapts, and she is the consummate goody two-shoes.
Right.
The rule follower.
Yeah.
Right.
It's all learning from the mistakes, the next way to put it.
Yes, right. But all of that is simply an adaptive strategy. That's all it is. It's not necessarily authentic behavior. Some of it is, but not all of it. And until we reconcile the pain or the potential for pain, because that's the big key, is you take on these masks to avoid the pain from happening again, right? To decrease the possibility for it to happen again. And that's why most often our greatest strength is simply an adaptation or an overcompensation to avoid experiencing pain.
Yeah, man. I mean, such good background on what your message is based off your life experience and what you teach, right? And it's this idea of the only way to grow is to lean into that discomfort.
It is, truly. And, that's where it gets incredibly tricky for most people, because they haven't done this deeper inner work, which is really the basis of the work that I do with men. Because they haven't done that, when they go to accomplish their goals, as an example, right? It's a round peg, square hole situation, because they experience so much resistance because their beliefs are not a match for their behaviors, right? There's a lack of congruence there. That's why people don't accomplish their goals, is there's a disconnect or a lack of congruence, aka harmony, between their unconscious beliefs and their conscious desires. There's no, like, end, period. End of story. Like, that's it. And so until we do, well, like I mentioned, because our beliefs are shaped by what has happened to us. And so until we, like the stories that we make up about ourselves, so it doesn't need to be this big T trauma that you experience. It could simply be a comment that somebody made to you in passing that leaves this imprint that then causes you to see yourself or see the world completely differently.
Right.
And now you're overcompensating. And 10 years later, 20 years later, what's the narrative? This is just who I am.
Yeah. Man. Well, that's valuable stuff. And it really sets the stage well for the work you're doing today. And I want to transition into how everything you just shared, all of these insights, your life experience has influenced your career journey and then your entrepreneurial journey. And, you know, I remember in your book, you'd mentioned you were doing some jobs and you were not holding a job. Right? And things just weren't clicking. And then you were working in restaurants, right? And then you ended up founding your company as a coach. And could you just kind of walk us through the beginning stages of that and then the founding of your business?
Yeah, well, I mean, it got to the point where, you know, as Tony Robbins says, like, until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change, you're not actually going to change. And so for me, it was this prevailing notion that I was capable of so much more. I was 29 years old, still working and serving tables in restaurants, knowing that I wanted to impact other people, knowing that I wanted to have a positive influence in the lives of other people, but of course, deeply failing, at least in my mind, to make that happen. And so that cognitive dissonance is what really pushed me to take a look in the mirror and say, like, I need to become someone else. Not that I'm not good enough, you know, inherently, but clearly I need to do some interpersonal work in order to become the person that I say I'm committed to being and becoming, so that I can accomplish what I want to accomplish and have an impact on the lives of other people and have a certain degree of impact. And so that's what pushed me down the road of personal development. And now I would say, you know, that without continuous personal development, you are now all that you will ever become.
I love that. Yeah, the personal development never stops.
Correct. And the real work is in talking about the things that I don't want to talk about. It's in addressing the things that I would rather avoid, which is why the breakthroughs that everyone is looking for are found on the other side of the things that we avoid. It's not in, you know, all of these external various things that our ego places so much importance on.
Right.
You know, accumulation, again, the pursuit of power, possession, and prestige, right? The three biggest lies of the ego is I am what I have, I am what I do, I am what other people say or think about me. And our culture literally is structured to help us answer those questions. When in reality, they're all self-serving at the end of the day. Our life has to eventually, we have to break out of that phase of individuation, of self-actualization, where it's all about becoming the best version of ourselves. We all have to play that game, to be clear. We all have to play that game for a period of time until we finally realize that, like, oh, wow, this is really empty. Right? It's the addict's credo. We always want more of what doesn't work.
Sure.
You know, and to speak into, you know, what happened after I went down the road of personal development, you know, things did improve. Things got better. Of course, my relationships got better. I started becoming more successful in my career. I moved out to California, started a healthcare tech company with a couple of other guys. It became, you know, an incredibly successful company in a very short period of time. We went from nothing to over $4 million in annual business in 18 months.
Incredible.
I had never been more unhappy in my life because I was still performing over top of my pain. I had yet to really address the sexual abuse. I had not yet unpacked it and all of the various beliefs that it created within me that had me overcompensating and being hell-bent on, achieving a certain level of success. But it just had me moving the goalposts on my fulfillment, my peace, my happiness, right? Which is this massive lie that we buy into, is that like my happiness, my joy, my peace, my fulfillment is on the other side of this goal accomplished. Well, what is that implying? That those things are not available to me in this moment. And so you play that game and you continue to kick the can down the road on your happiness. And of course, we always return to what we practice. And so at a certain point in time, I had to wake up and be like, wow, this game of becoming a wildly successful, tech executive is deeply unfulfilling because it's really all about me. It's all about me. It's not about me being in service to other people.
Wow.
And so that all had to fall apart. And this is where so many men are nowadays, is they accomplish a high degree of success, whatever that success looks like for them, whether it's in their career and business, whether it's, with their health and fitness. And they're miserable. They're still anxious. They're still angry. They're still overwhelmed. The amount of men who go through various men's coaching programs who come out on the other end more successful in a certain degree, in a certain way, shape, or form, whether it's, again, related to their finances or their fitness or something else, but who still have yet to resolve their anger and the grief beneath it is immense. It is immense.
Yeah, you're right. It's so true when I think of it. And just this lack of fulfillment that so many guys, were on the surface level, it looks like they got it all that they have, or they're not aligned with their purpose. And in many cases, they just don't know what that is.
And that's what it has to become about. At a certain point in time, we have to break out of this self-actualization, individuation stage so that we can step into transformation and transcendence.
Right.
Which is all about being in relationship with a higher purpose and a higher power, where it's not about me.
Yeah.
Because those are the only two things that are a higher source for living. Truly.
That's where it all starts.
Correct. Yeah, it has to be bigger than me. It has to be bigger than my own egoic game and pursuit of individual success and performative whatever. It has to become about other people. It has to become about being of higher service to humanity. Until that happens, you'll continue to play this game, this egoic game that is all about accomplishment, achievement, and success. And so many men are doing that, and they're anxious, they're depressed, and we have a higher suicide rate than we've ever experienced before in history.
For sure.
It's daunting. It's daunting. And until men break out of that game, they're never going to experience true happiness and true peace.
Gosh. And I mean, the natural question that anyone would ask in response to that would be, how do you dive to that deeper layer? Because it sounded like you were doing personal development work, and you were fixing some things a couple layers down, but not 10 layers down. Yeah,
well, that's where, so we start there. Personal development takes 3 phases: construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. So in the construction phase, it's all about becoming aware of my internal blocks and barriers that are currently getting in the way of me being my most authentic self.
I love this, man. This is, by the way, I just have to say, it's such a theme that's come up on my podcast with some other people, but keep going.
Yep. Love it. So good. I love that people are waking up to this and having more conversations about it. It's becoming aware of all of those various things, right? It's becoming aware of the walls of your prison cell is the best way to put it. But most people stop there because upon achieving new levels of conscious awareness, they think they've experienced a breakthrough, which is not true. All you have is more information. As an example, I'm now aware that there are rats in the attic, but the rats are still there. I still need to do something about that.
Right.
Right. So very different work between construction. Construction is becoming aware of the fact that there are rats in the attic. Deconstruction is actually doing all of the cleanup work necessary to get rid of them. Mm-hmm. And that's what most people don't actually step into, because the ego will absolutely convince you that you've done a bunch of work in the construction phase when all you've accomplished is acquiring new information.
Right.
About yourself, about your compensating strategies, about your adaptive traits or characteristics that have you not living up to your potential. Mm-hmm. In the deconstruction phase, that's the messy phase. That's where we die to our false self. The Bible calls it the flesh. It's also called the admired identity, right? The identity that we take on in order to receive the admiration, the acceptance of other people.
Right.
That's where we die to that. And that's messy work. And it takes a lot of time. And it takes us literally identifying and reconciling the most painful moments in our lives, whether it's big T trauma, whether it's small T trauma, because we all have emotional trauma.
Right.
That's the inherently messy work. And it takes time, and it takes integration and application so that we can eventually reconstruct.
Right.
And that's where we step into our most authentic self, a life that is authentic to us and is a reflection of our gift and our authentic desires, right? Which have been redeemed because we're no longer overcompensating. So we're no longer focused about our own success. At that point, it's bigger than that. It's about purpose, and whatever success comes from that is simply, it ensues. It's like this organic, natural byproduct or response. It's not the focus.
Right. Wow. So let's talk about how this all fuels your business today.
Yep.
So you did the health tech startup for how long was that for?
I was only involved in the company for 2 years.
Okay. And then did you go to your coaching business straight after that?
I did, yep. So
okay.
I was in the world of personal development for myself and for my own benefit for 3-4 years before I started my coaching business. So it was mostly simply as a passion,
I see. So it's kind of like on the side for...
Yeah, I started going to workshops. I started going to conferences, all of these various things, because the notion of being or becoming the best version of myself was just so inherently appealing.
You were doing that for you.
Correct. I was doing that for me. But the more I did it, the more I fell in love with it. I started to volunteer through various different programs in Los Angeles and San Diego, various personal development programs, which I talk about at length in my book as well. And I just became hooked with the notion of helping people, first and foremost, but primarily helping people become the best version of themselves, or better put, the most authentic version of themselves, which requires reconciling your pain.
Right. So,
go ahead.
Oh, well, I just want to dig into that exactly, because you hear that phrase a lot in the self-development improvement, men's coaching category, right? It's, help someone become the best version of themselves. I want to really dive into your differentiator though. And who is your target client? Based off the experiences you've went through. How do you stand out as a coach, as someone who can help someone get there where you would align with them in a much better way, so that you're not just another men's coach?
Well, true transformation at the end of the day is always predicated on dying to something. If you come to me and you say, hey, Jake, I want to hire you as my coach. If all I do is say, okay, great. What habits do you need to let go of? What habits do you need to adopt? What behaviors do you need to quit? What behaviors do you need to take on in order to, quote unquote, become a better version of yourself? All I'm doing is addressing the symptoms. That's it. Again, not that there can't be positive benefits that come from that, but all we're doing is addressing the surface level issue, which are your habits and your behaviors. That's it. We haven't done the internal work to address what's beneath that, what's motivating your current habits and behaviors. And this is why yo-yo dieting is such a prevailing problem, especially in the health and fitness space, is because what happens, the person's beliefs and their identity has not changed. And so what do? They revert back to their former level of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
It happens all the time.
Right.
It happens all the time. In fact, studies show that after someone has hired a fitness professional, whether it's, a personal trainer to help them with their health and fitness, or it's a dietitian or a nutritionist, over 90% of people return to their former level of behavior. Because all they did was address their habits and their behaviors and not the underlying beliefs beneath it. Mm. So true transformation is always predicated on dying to something, knowing that becoming the best version of myself is actually much more about unbecoming, undoing, unlearning than it is about becoming, doing, or developing.
Because, it's the idea of reversing back to rebuilding the foundation versus just trying to build on top of it and cover it up.
100%. Yep. Because all that's doing is shifting the addiction.
Right.
That's all it's doing, is shifting the addiction from these, unhealthy habits, mm-hmm. unhealthy behavior patterns to more healthy ones. Mm-hmm. It's, again, same package, different bow.
Right.
Same song, different dance.
Mm-hmm. So what you're describing really could apply to so many guys out there, right? Which 100%. Is great. And you obviously could help a lot of these guys, right? But is there someone specifically who you've found as a particular type of client that you resonate with the most, that you think benefits the most from working with you based off the trauma that you've experienced?
Yeah, the man who has accomplished a high level of success and on some level internally feels empty. Mm. Because there are so many men out there that applies to. And I mean, it's such an empty feeling to get everything that you say you wanted or achieve everything that you set out to achieve and feel internally unhappy, empty, and wanting. Mm-hmm. We always want more of what doesn't work.
Yeah.
Most men get to that point and they simply do not know what to do.
Right.
So what do? They just keep playing the game. Mm-hmm. They keep playing the game that has them addicted, that has them anxious, that has them stressed. It has them overworking. It has them on the road to burnout because they don't know any other way. Mm-hmm. They don't know any other way. And until they wake up to the game that they are playing, they're going to continue to feel worse and worse. Mm-hmm. I've been doing this for so long to know that is a zero-sum game. It really, really is.
Yeah.
So many men that I work with and talk to, in the beginning, they can't even tell me what hobbies they have.
Man.
They can't even tell me what hobbies they have because they're so overly consumed with the pursuit of power, possession, prestige, status, making something of myself, right? Becoming the best version of myself. And again, not that there's anything inherently wrong with that, but what is actually driving that behavior is this deep-seated insecurity. Mm-hmm. Just like with me, that came from this painful incident that I experienced, that I sought to accomplish my way around. And it just does not work that way.
You're right. Man, and with all this growth that you've had, where you've become so enlightened to how you're able to speak today, what would you say has been the biggest challenge? It can be a specific moment or it could be general from when you became an entrepreneur specifically. How would you describe that?
In a quote, which is that there's two ways of being a prophet. One is to tell the enslaved that they are free. That's the path of Moses. And the other one is to tell the free that they are actually enslaved. That's the more difficult path of Jesus.
Wow. So basically, to translate that into like a real world situation, it's telling one of your clients that they're broken if they don't really realize it.
Right.
Wow. And that's such a core part of your work that usually that's how it starts if you're working with someone new.
Yeah.
Right?
If someone, as an example, if someone's rich in money but poor in happiness, that's a telltale sign that they're overcompensating because they have unresolved pain.
Wow.
And that's a lot of men out there. I mean, it's a lot of people in general, but for our purposes, because I work with men, it's so many men. Right. And it's so easy to justify, again, inherently behind the guise of faith, family, fitness, and finances that has so many men successful on the outside, but internally and inside they're suffering. They're anxious, they're angry, and they don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do about it. And because we live in a society where we've normalized stress in many ways, most people don't actually realize it until it's like too late.
Right.
Until whatever their coping mechanism of choice is becomes so bad that it's like painfully obvious at that point in time, right? There's no other recourse than to, point out the elephant in the room. And I would even suggest that kind of needs to happen. That needs to play itself out where we, essentially hit rock bottom, if you will, that propels us then to change, because otherwise we won't. We'll keep playing the game,
right?
And this typically takes shape in the form of death, disease, or divorce.
Wow. What is an entrepreneurial life hack that might go against the mainstream belief that you've experienced from your business journey that you could share with the audience?
If your life, if your business, if your relationship isn't working, if there's consistent breakdown happening, I can almost guarantee you that it's because you're out of alignment when it comes to basic cornerstone habits: diet, sleep, exercise, prayer, meditation, breath work. But meditation by far and away has been quite easily the most profound spiritual practice for me.
Wow.
By far and away. Because, meditation has been scientifically proven to be able to shrink your amygdala, which is the lizard part of your brain that is responsible for fight or flight. Most people's nervous systems are in fight or flight because of how much we've normalized stress, how much we work in relationship to how much time we take off, how much rest we actually get, how much time we spend recuperating. And again, it leads to a various degree of health problems. And so, they say that emotional intelligence is directly tied to one's ability to be non-reactive. Well, that's exactly what meditation teaches us, is to experience my thoughts, but not react to them, or not necessarily need to take action on them, right? Because we so closely identify with our thoughts when we are not our thoughts, right? We're the one listening to them. If you're familiar with Michael Singer and his work in The Untethered Soul. But because we've so closely identified ourselves with our thoughts, what do? We simply react to them and we take action upon them. But meditation teaches us to disconnect from our thoughts and become a neutral observer to them so that we can practice equanimity, which is non-reactivity. Yeah. Which, of course, has a host of benefits when it comes to interpersonal conflict, which is just a natural part of human life, right? Whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with your partner, whether it's in friendships, whether it's with coworkers or employees, we're always going to be put in a position where we have to navigate difficult conversations or conflict or tension. And at the end of the day, how we work through that and our ability to effectively work through that, of course, in many ways dictates the course of our lives.
What does your meditation practice look like specifically? Like, how often do you do it? For how long?
Yep. I meditate for a minimum of 30 minutes every morning. It takes about 20 minutes for your brain to go into theta, where neuroplasticity is actually possible, which is where your brain actually starts to rewire itself. And so, 10 to 15 minutes is a really good place to start if you don't have a meditation practice, but you want to work up to over 20 minutes so that you can really start to get those benefits.
and you do it right after waking up?
I try not to go any more from one sedentary thing, that being sleeping, to another sedentary thing. So in the morning, I typically I wake up, I go for a walk, take a cold shower, and then I go into meditation, and then I start my work day.
Nice.
So I do, you don't necessarily have to go for a walk, but I would recommend that you invite in some level of movement before you go into another sedentary thing.
Movement and sun.
Yep. Movement and sun is great. Absolutely. Get outside.
Right.
Get the sunlight in your face. Obviously it supports with your circadian rhythm, your sleep, all of those various things.
Sure. I love it, man. Well, is there someone from your network who you would recommend? But by the way, this has been an amazing story. So thank you for sharing all this valuable wisdom that you've gained from your experience and from your time with the work that you've done with all these men that you're helping and other people. But is there somebody from your network who you would recommend I also have on this show? Somebody who's on an entrepreneurial journey of their own?
Oh man, absolutely. I will have to think about that. I've got so many friends in this space who can really add a voice to this conversation. One of my really good friends, Antonio, also has a podcast called Consistency Wins.
Cool.
Which I think would be a really great opportunity for you to potentially trade episodes. You could be on his podcast. He could be on yours.
That'd be awesome.
Great guy, very personal, development focused. One of my clients, actually, his name's Justin Buonomo. Incredible guy. He supports entrepreneurs and business owners with their finances and really optimizing for their finances, but also, the interpersonal work that is beneath our financial decisions.
Sure.
Right. And so really optimizing for those and your habits and your patterns of behavior that really drive your financial decisions. And so he would be someone that would really lend a beautiful perspective on money, but more importantly, like our relationship to money and really what drives that, because they say that, nobody buys things, they buy feelings.
Right.
Right. They buy emotions.
Yeah.
But of course those emotions are always fleeting. We need something new to fill the void. And so I think he'd be a great guest for the show too.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Perfect. A topic for the Nichols and Dime show, right?
Awesome. There you go. Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Jake, again, great conversation. How can people find you, get to know you, and potentially work with you? Obviously, we have your book here, Let Love In. So here it is, guys. And where can people buy your book and get to know you?
Yeah, so you can obviously find it on Amazon. Just make sure you search my full name. So that's Jacob Kauffman, Kauffman. You can go to my website, awakewithjake.com. Otherwise, the best place to interact with me is via Instagram, which is I am Jake Kauffman. Again, that's Kauffman.
Awesome. Jake, again, what an honor. Thank you so much for coming, dude. I love to talk to you and meet you and get to know you, and look forward to getting to know you more going forward, seeing your success.
Absolutely, Chris. Thanks again for having me, brother. This has been great.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Nichols and Dime Show. Please hit the subscribe button on YouTube and follow my Instagram page at Nichols and Dimes. The podcast Instagram page is at Nichols and Dimes Show. And please like any of the videos you come across on either platform and leave a comment, leave feedback. It helps me to improve and innovate and to continue to scale and bring more interesting guests to the Nichols and Dimes Show. Thank you all for the support, and we'll see you next time.